Imagine standing in a medieval church, falsely accused of murder. The entire village watches as the priest approaches with a piece of consecrated bread in his trembling hands. Your life hangs in the balance, not on evidence or witnesses, but on whether this holy morsel will slide down your throat or lodge there, condemning you to death. This is your trial. This is your judge. This is the ordeal by blessed bread. And what happened next defied everything we think we know about medieval justice. But before we dive into this mind-bending practice that determined life and death for countless souls, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because today's story will change how you see medieval justice forever. And I guarantee by the end of this video, you'll understand why this ancient practice was both more terrifying and more brilliant than you ever imagined. Picture this: England, 1194. A merchant named William de Brose stands accused of stealing silver coins from the local abbey. No witnesses, no physical evidence, just suspicion and whispered accusations. In our world, he'd walk free, but in medieval England, William faces something far more terrifying than any modern courtroom. He must undergo the ordeal by blessed bread, known in Latin as the Judicium Offae Benedictae. The priest begins the ancient ritual, blessing a piece of barley bread, while reciting prayers that have echoed through these stone walls for centuries. The entire congregation holds its breath as William approaches the altar. His hands shake not from cold, but from pure terror, because everyone in that church knows the horrible truth. If this bread sticks in his throat, if he chokes, if he cannot swallow, God himself has declared him guilty, and death awaits. The origins of this practice stretch back into the darkest corners of early medieval Europe, but it reached its peak during the reign of the Anglo-Saxon kings. The logic, twisted as it seems to our modern minds, was actually quite sophisticated. Medieval people believed that God was constantly intervening in human affairs, and that the divine would never allow an innocent person to suffer unjustly. If you were truly innocent, God would grant you the ability to swallow the consecrated bread easily. If guilty, your own sin would literally choke you. But here's where it gets absolutely fascinating. This wasn't just some barbaric superstition. The ritual was incredibly elaborate and deeply rooted in Christian theology. The bread had to be blessed by a priest using specific prayers. The accused had to fast beforehand. Certain words had to be spoken, certain gestures made. The church took this so seriously that they developed detailed manuals explaining exactly how the ordeal should be conducted. Let me paint you another scene. Picture young Margaret, a peasant girl accused of witchcraft in 10th century France. The year is 987, and whispers have spread through her village that she cursed the baker's cow, causing it to give sour milk. In the flickering candlelight of the village church, Margaret kneels before the altar as the priest prepares the blessed bread. Her accusers crowd behind her, their faces twisted with suspicion and fear. The priest places the consecrated morsel on Margaret's tongue. Time stops. The entire congregation watches her throat, waiting for that telltale sign. Will she swallow, or will she choke? Margaret's eyes well with tears, not from guilt, but from sheer terror. The bread sits heavy on her tongue, and for a moment that feels like eternity, it seems to stick. A gasp rises from the crowd, but then, miraculously, she swallows, and the bread goes down smooth as silk. The crowd erupts in relief and praise. God has declared her innocent. But what if Margaret had choked? What if the bread had lodged in her throat? History tells us of countless cases where the accused could not swallow the blessed bread, and the consequences were swift and brutal. Choking was seen as divine judgment, and the guilty party faced immediate punishment, often death, sometimes exile, always disgrace. Now here's where this story takes an incredible turn that will blow your mind. Modern medical science has actually provided a fascinating explanation for why this ordeal might have seemed to work so consistently. When we're terrified, our bodies produce stress hormones that literally dry up our saliva and cause our throat muscles to constrict. An innocent person, confident in their innocence, might remain calm enough to produce sufficient saliva to swallow the bread, but a guilty person, consumed with fear and anxiety about their crime being discovered, might actually be physiologically unable to swallow due to their body's stress response. In other words, the ordeal by blessed bread might have been an ancient lie detector test, using the body's own stress response to reveal guilt or innocence. The medieval mind attributed this to divine intervention, but we now understand it as a sophisticated psychological and physiological phenomenon. Let me share with you one of the most dramatic cases recorded in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. In the year 1043, During the reign of Edward the Confessor, a powerful earl named Godwin was accused of murdering the king's brother, Alfred. The political implications were enormous. This accusation threatened to tear apart the entire kingdom. Rather than risk civil war, it was decided that Earl Godwin would undergo the ordeal by blessed bread in front of the entire royal court. Picture the scene: Westminster's Great Hall, packed with nobles, bishops and courtiers. The tension is so thick you could cut it with a sword. Earl Godwin, one of the most powerful men in England, approaches the altar with the dignity befitting his station, but everyone can see the strain in his eyes. The Archbishop of Canterbury himself oversees the ceremony, holding up the consecrated bread as he intones the sacred words. Godwin takes the bread, places it in his mouth, and chokes. The bread lodges in his throat. He gasps, struggles, his face turning red as he fights for air. Within moments, he collapses and dies right there on the church floor. The entire court erupts in chaos, some crying out that God has revealed a murderer, others wailing that they've witnessed a divine miracle of justice. Whether Earl Godwin was actually guilty of murder, we'll never know. But his death by choking on the blessed bread was seen as absolute proof of his guilt, and it changed the course of English history. The power vacuum left by his death led to political upheavals that would resonate for generations. The practice wasn't limited to England. Records show that ordeals by blessed bread were conducted across medieval Europe, from the monasteries of Ireland to the courts of the Holy Roman Empire. In Germany, they called it Gottesgericht, God's judgment. In France, Jugement de Dieu. Each culture added its own variations, but the core principle remained the same. Let God decide guilt or innocence through this sacred test. But here's something that might surprise you. The church itself eventually grew uncomfortable with these ordeals. By the early 13th century, church scholars began questioning whether it was appropriate to force God to perform miracles on demand. The Fourth Lateran Council in 1215 formally banned clergy from participating in trials by ordeal, effectively ending the practice across most of Christian Europe. Yet the psychological impact lingered for centuries. Even after the formal practice ended, people continued to believe in the power of blessed bread to reveal truth. Folklore across Europe is filled with stories of guilty individuals who couldn't eat blessed communion wafers or who choked on holy bread during religious ceremonies. The ordeal by blessed bread reveals something profound about medieval society's relationship with justice, faith, and truth. These weren't primitive people engaging in random superstition. They were sophisticated thinkers who developed a complex system for determining guilt or innocence in a world where evidence was scarce and witness testimony unreliable. Think about it. In a society without forensic science, without DNA testing, without modern investigative techniques, how do you determine who's telling the truth? The medieval answer was to appeal directly to the highest authority they recognized, God himself, and they developed intricate rituals and procedures to ensure that this divine judgment was properly invoked. The tragedy, of course, is that innocent people undoubtedly died because they were too terrified to swallow, while some guilty individuals may have escaped justice by remaining calm enough to get the bread down. But from the medieval perspective, this was impossible. God would never allow such injustice to occur. What fascinates historians today is how this practice reveals the medieval mind's attempt to create objective justice in a subjective world. They recognize the same problems we face today. How do you determine truth when people lie, when evidence is absent, when witnesses disagree? Their solution was to remove human judgment entirely and appeal to divine authority. The legacy of the ordeal by blessed bread extends far beyond medieval history. It represents humanity's eternal struggle to find truth and deliver justice, and our willingness to create elaborate systems to achieve these goals. Whether through ancient ordeals or modern polygraph tests, we continue searching for that perfect method to separate truth from falsehood, innocence from guilt. The next time you take communion, or see someone blessing bread in a religious ceremony, remember Margaret and William and Earl Godwin. Remember that for centuries, a simple piece of blessed bread held the power of life and death, the weight of divine judgment, the hope of vindication, or the terror of condemnation. So what do you think? Was the ordeal by blessed bread a brilliant ancient lie detector, or a tragic miscarriage of justice? Could there be wisdom hidden in this medieval practice that we've forgotten in our modern world? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one and love hearing your perspectives on these incredible historical mysteries. And if you enjoyed diving deep into this dark corner of medieval justice, you're going to love our next video about trial by combat, where accused criminals could literally fight for their innocence with swords and shields. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on so you don't miss it, because that story will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about medieval law. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and remember, history is far stranger and more fascinating than any fiction we could imagine.